Some towns hold their secrets tight. Millbrook wears them like a shroud. Welcome to a place where retirement is less about peace and more about facing the past. My name is Frank Simmons, a cop haunted by a cold case. But I found myself living by 3 strange rules just to survive the shadows of a condemned mental institution. What's the creepiest abandoned building you've ever seen? Tell me in the comments below. And if you're brave enough to face Hillcrest after dark, subscribe to Night Creepypasta Rules and ring that bell. Because in Millbrook, the past isn't just history. It's waiting. It's waiting. The watch begins now. The first thing that hit me wasn't the chill of Penobscot Bay, nor the scent of pine and damp earth that was supposed to be here in Millbrook, Maine. It was a cold, familiar dread, coiling in my gut like a slumbering serpent, disturbed. 30 years. 30 years since I'd last seen the skeletal silhouette of Hillcrest Asylum looming on that godforsaken hill. A jagged tooth against the bruised twilight sky. I'd driven away then. A rookie cop with a half-finished, deeply unsettling case file tucked in my satchel. A case that had been abruptly, inexplicably closed from on high. Now, I was back. A retired Boston homicide detective, Frank Simmons, looking for a peace that felt as distant and mythical as the town's cheerful welcome sign. The weight of that old failure, that lingering wrongness, settled over me thicker than any coastal fog. Brody Maxwell hadn't changed much, just thicker around the middle, his once dark hair, now a salt and pepper cap beneath his sheriff's Stetson. The warmth in his handshake felt forced, his eyes holding a guarded weariness I recognized from too many years looking into the abyss. We sat in his cramped office, the air thick with the smell of stale coffee and unspoken history. "Good to have you back, Frank," he said, the words sounding rehearsed. Though I gotta say, Millbrook ain't exactly a retirement hotspot. It's quiet. Quiet is what I'm looking for, Brody. I lied, or at least told myself I was. He leaned back, his chair creaking in protest. Quiet has its price here, Frank. Some things, some places, they're best left undisturbed. Hillcrest, for instance. His gaze flicked towards the window, towards the distant, brooding shape on the hill. The town lives by a few. Let's call them local customs. For your own good, you'd be wise to observe them. He then laid out the 3 rules, his voice low and serious, each one more bizarre than the last. Never drive past Hillcrest after dark. Don't answer any phantom payphones. Stay indoors when the fog gets too thick to see. He didn't offer explanations, just the grim assertion that they were matters of survival, not superstition. The way he said it, the deep lines etched around his eyes, told me he believed every damn word. My childhood home, inherited after my estranged mother's passing, felt cold and empty, mirroring the hollow in my own chest. Dust lay thick on everything, a shroud over memories I'd tried to bury. As I stood by a grimy window, looking out at the encroaching night, a faint mournful sound drifted on the wind. It could have been the sigh of ancient trees, or the far-off cry of a loon, or it could have been the wind whistling through the shattered panes of Hillcrest Asylum, carrying with it whispers I wasn't ready to hear. I told myself it was just the wind, but the serpent in my gut stirred restlessly. Sleep, when it finally came, was shallow and troubled. I woke with a start, heart hammering, unsure what had disturbed me. The room was pitch black, the silence of Millbrook absolute. Then I heard it, faint, tinny, achingly out of place, the distinct, rhythmic ringing of a telephone. Brrring, brrring. It seemed to come from somewhere outside, down the street. A lonely, insistent summons in a town that Brody had assured me hadn't had a functioning public payphone in over a decade. The serpent in my gut was now wide awake and hissing. The phantom ringing continued for perhaps a dozen cycles, each one a nail hammered into the coffin Scylla hoped for peace, before abruptly stopping, leaving behind a silence that felt even more charged than before. I didn't move, didn't dare breathe too loudly. remembering Brody's second rule with a chilling clarity. Something was calling, but it wasn't for me to answer. The rest of the night was a sleepless vigil. Every creak of the old house, every sigh of the wind, magnified into a potential threat. The next few days I tried to settle in, unpacked a few boxes, made a desultory attempt at fishing down at the old pier. But Hillcrest loomed, both literally and figuratively. The town itself seemed to hold its breath, its Rockwellian facade barely concealing an undercurrent Scylla old fears. I found the Millbrook Historical Society, housed in the back of a dusty, underfunded library that smelled of decaying paper and forgotten stories. The acting librarian, a woman named Eleanor Ellie Ainsworth, was a bird-like septuagenarian with eyes as sharp as obsidian shards. She regarded me with a mixture of suspicion and an almost predatory curiosity when I mentioned my interest in Hillcrest. "The asylum," she'd said, her voice a dry rustle. "Most folks round here pretend it ain't even there. Easier that way. But some shadows, they got long memories." She grudgingly allowed me access to a few boxes of brittle newspaper clippings and faded town records, her gaze following me as I sifted through the fragile history. The pull of the unanswered call was strong. Morbid curiosity, or perhaps the ingrained habit of a detective smelling a cold case, led me on a walk a few days later. I followed the general direction of the phantom ringing. On a deserted corner near the old cannery, now a collapsing ruin, I found it. A rusted metal plate bolted to a brick wall, the faint outline where a payphone enclosure had once been. Nothing else. Yeah. As I stood there, a sudden, unnatural chill permeated the air, and for a fleeting moment, I caught the distinct antiseptic scent of a hospital corridor, overlaid with something else, something faintly metallic, like old, dried blood. A shiver traced its way down my spine. The air shimmered for a second, and I could have sworn I heard the faint click of a receiver being replaced, followed by a sigh. I met Dr. Evelyn Hayes at the town's small clinic shortly after, a routine checkup I'd scheduled more out of a need for normalcy than any actual ailment. She was in her late 40s, professional, with intelligent, calm eyes. She spoke of Millbrook's limited resources, the challenges of rural medicine. When I cautiously broached the subject of Hillcrest, she gave the official line: structural instability, asbestos, the usual reasons for condemnation. A sad chapter, of course, she'd said, her expression unreadable. Tragic, some of the antiquated treatments, but best left in the past. Wouldn't you agree, Mr. Simmons? There was a smooth finality to her tone that discouraged further questions. That evening, restless, I took another walk, the unease from the phantom phone still clinging to me. As I passed a narrow, unlit alley between two boarded-up storefronts, not far from where the payphone had been, I saw him. An indistinct figure, tall and gaunt, silhouetted against the faint glow of a distant streetlight. He was moving slowly, almost shuffling. But what caught my attention, freezing me in place, was the sound. A low, tuneless whistling, a strange, discordant melody that seemed to crawl under my skin. It tugged at something deep in my memory, a faint, chilling echo from that old shelved Hillcrest case file, a detail I couldn't quite grasp. Before I could get a better look, the figure turned and melted into the deeper shadows of the alley, the whistling fading into the night's other, more mundane sounds. But the melody and the unease it produced lingered. Ellie Ainsworth's archives, though disorganized, were a goldmine still a grim suggestion. Faded articles from the Millbrook Chronicle circa 1950s and 60s lauded Dr. Lawrence Winter's revolutionary therapies at Hillcrest. Hydrotherapy, electroshock, experimental psychotropics, all hailed as breakthroughs. Then, a subtle shift in tone. Brief, sanitized mentions of unforeseen complications, patient transfers, and then a carefully worded piece on a minor fire incident, and the subsequent quiet condemnation of the entire facility. No mention of patient deaths, no hint of the darker rumors that even I, as a rookie, had heard whispers Scylla decades ago. The town's memory had been professionally scrubbed, but the stains, I suspected, had merely soaked deeper into the foundations. Ellie mentioned in hushed tones old tales of sudden, thick fogs that coincided with the worst incidents at Hillcrest. Fogs that were unnatural, even for the coast. The first rule, never drive past Hillcrest after dark, was one I'd intended to rigorously uphold. But life, even retired life, had a way of throwing curveballs. A call from my sister in Portland. Her youngest had taken a tumble, a suspected concoction. She needed someone to watch her older kids while she dealt with the hospital. By the time I was heading back to Millbrook, it was well past midnight. A sliver of a malevolent moon hanging in the sky. The long way home would add another hour, and exhaustion was a heavy cloak. Against my better judgment, fueled by weariness and a stubborn spark of defiance, I took the old Hillcrest Road. The asylum grounds were a black, sprawling miasma on the hillside, the main building a jagged mouth, gaping at the stars. My headlights cut through the darkness, illuminating crumbling stone walls, overgrown courtyards, and windows like vacant eyes. And then I saw them, not clearly, not distinctly, but movements, shadows detaching themselves from deeper shadows. Slow, languid, almost drifting figures among the skeletal trees and broken-down outbuildings. There was no overt threat, no sudden lunge from the darkness, just a profound sense of sorrow, of lost souls condemned to an eternal, aimless wander. But the feeling of being watched, of unseen eyes following the progress of my car, was intense, suffocating. My hands gripped the steering wheel, my knuckles white. I didn't speed up. I didn't dare. I just drove, counting the seconds until Hillcrest was in my rearview mirror. The encounter emboldened me to confront Brody again. We met at the diner, the only place in Millbrook that seemed to hold a semblance of normalcy. I laid out what I'd seen, what I suspected. His face, usually stoic, tightened. "Frank, for God's sake," he said, his voice low and urgent, "you're playing with fire. Those rules aren't quaint local folklore. They're tripwires. Some doors are meant to stay locked, for everyone's safety." He wouldn't elaborate, just kept repeating his warnings, his gaze haunted. It was Dr. Evelyn Hayes who, surprisingly, offered a chink of light. I ran into her at the pharmacy, and on impulse, mentioned my research, framing it as a historical curiosity. A strange look crossed her face, something I couldn't quite decipher. "No, Hillcrest is a sensitive subject, Frank," she said carefully. "But as the county me, I do have access to certain archived medical records. Some were improperly stored after the closure. If your interest is purely academic, perhaps I could assist. Unofficially, of course. It felt like a test, an offer freighted with unspoken conditions. Later that week, a plain manila envelope appeared in my mailbox. Inside, photocopies of patient admission forms, heavily redacted treatment logs, and a few grainy photographs. One showed Dr. Lawrence Winters, a man with piercing eyes and a humorless smile, standing with a group of stern-faced nurses. In the background, half hidden in the shadows behind a gurney, was a young patient. His face was blurred, but his posture, the slight tilt of his head, was unmistakable. And though I couldn't see his lips clearly, I knew, with a sudden, sickening certainty, that he was whistling that same discordant, unforgettable tune. The hair on the back of my neck stood on end. It started subtly, a pearlescent haze clinging to the hollows in the early mornings, burning off by mid-morning. Then, it began to linger, a damp gray shroud that muted sounds and blurred edges, giving Millbrook an ethereal, dreamlike quality. The old-timers at the diner grumbled, their faces etched with a new layer of worry. Ellie Ainsworth. When I visited her, her library, feeling more like a besieged fortress than a repository of knowledge, looked genuinely frightened. "This ain't natural fog, Mr. Simmons," she whispered, her voice raspy. "This is Hillcrest fog. It moves with a mind Scylla own. When it gets thick, when you can't see your own hand in front of your face, you stay inside. You lock your doors, because they walk in it. The ones who are still looking." "Looking for who, Ellie?" I asked, though a cold dread was already forming in my gut. "The doctors, of course," she said, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. "The ones who hurt them. They don't forget. And in the fog, they can almost reach out and touch this world again." Her warning proved prophetic. I was caught out one late afternoon, returning from a fruitless trip to the county records office farther inland, when the fog rolled in from the bay with astonishing speed. 1 minute, a hazy visibility. The next, I was enveloped in a cloying, opaque soup that swallowed the road, the trees, everything. My headlights were useless, reflecting back a blinding white wall. I slowed to a crawl, my heart thumping. Then I heard it, a soft, shuffling footstep on the gravel shoulder, unnervingly close. Then another, a wet, ragged cough. And then the whistling, that same discordant, wandering melody, no longer distant, but seeming to emanate from just beyond the driver's side window. I couldn't see a thing, but I felt it, a malevolent presence, a palpable hatred, radiating through the dense, chilling curtain of white. It felt like something was circling my car, testing its defenses, searching. I gripped the wheel, my breath held tight, every nerve screaming. Then, as suddenly as it had begun, the sounds receded, the sense of immediate presence lessened, though the whistling lingered, a faint, mocking echo, swallowed by the oppressive gray. I didn't dare move until the fog thinned. Hours later, into a merely unsettling mist, the town's strange afflictions intensified with the fog. The phantom payphone rang more frequently, its summons more insistent, sometimes from multiple directions at once. The shadows around Hillcrest seemed to creep further down the hill each night, emboldened by the occluding veil. I even caught Evelyn Hayes acting strangely. Her unofficial assistance had dried up, her demeanor becoming more distant, almost furtive. I saw her car one evening, parked near a dilapidated, long-abandoned weather station on the bluffs overlooking the bay, a place notorious for its dense, localized fog patches. She was alone, standing near the cliff edge, seeming to stare out into the roiling gray, her posture almost devotional. When she saw me, she started, offered a curt, unconvincing excuse about checking air quality, and quickly drove off, driven by a gnawing suspicion. I returned to the weather station late the following night. The fog was thicker than I had ever seen it, a suffocating, silent entity. With a powerful flashlight, I cautiously approached the crumbling building. The door was ajar. Inside, lit by the eerie glow of battery-powered lanterns, Evelyn Hayes was not checking air quality. On the dusty concrete floor, she had drawn a complex series of interlocking circles and arcane symbols, reminiscent of something I'd once seen in a book on alchemy or an occult diagram. In the center, Scylla diagram, an array of scientific instruments, anemometers, barometers, strange antenna-like devices, hummed faintly. She was murmuring something, too low to discern, her hands outstretched towards the open doorway, where the fog, thick as cotton batting, pressed in like an expectant visitor. It looked, for all the world, like she was attempting to communicate with it, or perhaps to channel it. The pieces, still a horrifying puzzle, were beginning to slot into place, and the picture they formed was far more monstrous than I could have imagined. The fog didn't lift. For 7 days and 7 nights, Millbrook was swallowed by a silent, pearlescent leviathan. It crept into every alley, seeped under every door, a suffocating blanket that muted the world, and amplified the whispers of the unseen. The sun became a distant, forgotten memory. The moon a mere suggestion of ghostly light behind the impenetrable gray. Power lines heavy with moisture sputtered and failed, plunging the town into an even deeper, more primal darkness. The few remaining landlines crackled with static, voices from the outside world becoming faint and distorted, as if filtered through an immense distance. Millbrook was an island, adrift in a sea of insubstantial horrors. The rules became a grim, desperate mantra, then a cruel joke. Hillcrest no longer kept to its cursed hill. In the disorienting fog, its malignant influence seemed to bleed outwards. Shapes, unmistakably human yet unnervingly distorted, were glimpsed at the edges of vision, shuffling just beyond the feeble reach of flashlights, their mournful sighs carried on the damp air. Old Man Hemlock, who lived on the outskirts nearest the asylum, swore he woke to find shadowy figures standing in his cornfield, their heads lolling, their spectral hands reaching. The phantom payphones became a torturous chorus. Hurry! Shame us! Run! No longer single distant summons. They rang from every forgotten corner, sometimes 3 or 4 at once, their jangling discordance a soundtrack to the town's descent. And now, if you listened, truly listened past the metallic shriek of the bell, you could hear voices, faint, gasping, riddled with static, but voices nonetheless. They whispered names of long-dead Millbrook residents, names of doctors from Hillcrest's darkest days, and then, chillingly, names of the living. My name, Brody's, Ellie's. They weren't asking for help, but they were issuing indictments or perhaps invitations. The fog itself was no longer a passive curtain. It was an active participant. It eddied and swirled with an unnatural sentience, forming grotesque, half-seen shapes that writhed and dissolved. The cold it carried was bone-deep, a sepulchral chill that no amount of layered clothing could ward off. And within its opaque embrace, the whistler became bolder, its discordant, wandering nursery rhyme-like tune a constant, unnerving presence. Doors were found mysteriously unlatched. Objects moved. Cold spots appeared and vanished within locked rooms. One family on the edge of town barricaded themselves in their cellar after seeing a tall, gaunt figure with glowing eyes peering through their kitchen window, its breath misting the pane, its lips puckered in that infernal whistle. Ellie Ainsworth. Her small house now a candlelit fortress of books and fear, her eyes wide and luminous in the flickering light, finally shared the darkest secrets from her family's journals. Dr. Lawrence Winters hadn't just been conducting unethical experiments. He'd been obsessed with the very fabric of consciousness, with breaching the veil between perceived reality and something else. He believed the human mind, under extreme duress or chemical alteration, could become a conduit, a doorway. Hillcrest wasn't just a dumping ground for the unwanted. It was his laboratory for interdimensional trespassing. The Collective Sigh, as Ellie called the entity, wasn't just the sum of patient suffering. It was the raw, bleeding wound in reality that Winters had torn open. A wound that now wept tormented psychic energy and yearned to draw everything into its sight. Senseless, sorrowful void. Armed with this terrifying knowledge, I confronted Dr. Evelyn Hayes. I found her not at her clinic, but at the old weather station, her strange array of instruments now humming with a frantic, unstable energy, the symbols on the floor glowing faintly. The fog outside pressed against the windows like a living thing, its tendrils seeking entry. "This has to stop, Evelyn!" I yelled, my voice hoarse, the flashlight beam shaking in my hand. "Whatever you're doing, you're making it worse." Her composure finally cracked. Tears streamed down her face, etching paths through the grime and exhaustion. "You think I want this, Frank?" she cried, her voice ragged. He opened a door he couldn't close. My father, he was a monster, yes, but he was also a brilliant, deluded fool. He thought he could control it, master it. She gestured wildly at her equipment. This isn't to amplify it, it's to understand it, to find the frequency, the counter-resonance. He left notes, fragmented, insane, but they hint at a way to seal the rift, or at least contain it. But I need a focus, a conductor, someone with a pre-existing connection to Hillcrest's original trauma. Her gaze, desperate and feverish, fixed on me. That old case of yours, Frank. The nurse who vanished, the investigation you were pulled from. You were close then. You carry an echo of it. Before I could process the monstrous implication, Brody Maxwell burst through the door, his face pale, his shotgun at the ready. Frank, Hayes, it's everywhere. They're coming from the asylum grounds. Not just shadows anymore. They're more solid. He'd seen the true extent of the breach. The years of denial finally shattered, as if summoned by his words. The humming from Evelyn's equipment escalated into a deafening, painful whine. The fog outside the windows seemed to solidify further, and a figure coalesced within it, pressing against the glass. The Whistler, its shadowy form more defined, its eyes burning with a cold, hungry light. It tapped a long, skeletal finger on the pane, the sound sharp and distinct above the electronic shriek. Evelyn stumbled back, her face a mask of terror and dawning realization. It's too strong, she gasped. My attempts to map it. I think I've only shown it the way more clearly. It's using the fog as a bridge, coalescing. The old weather station groaned, the structure protesting under an unseen pressure. The door we'd entered through slammed shut with a violent crack, the rusted lock re-engaging as if turned by an invisible hand. We were trapped. Outside, the cacophony of phantom phone bells reached a maddening peak, and from the direction of Hillcrest, a low, collective moan, a sound of 1,000 tormented souls, began to roll across the fog-choked town, growing louder, closer. The collective sigh was no longer whispering. It was roaring, and in its vanguard, heralded by its discordant tune, the Whistler was trying to get in. The true, unmaking hour Scylla Millbrook had arrived. The old weather station became a fragile bastion against a besieging army of phantoms. The Whistler's relentless tapping on the glass grew more insistent, accompanied by a scraping sound, as if something sharp was being drawn across the panes. Cracks began to spiderweb from the tapping point. Outside, the collective moaning intensified, a tidal wave of sorrow and rage threatening to drown us. Brody, his face a grim mask, stood ready with his shotgun, though we all knew conventional weapons were likely useless against this tide. The primary focus, Hillcrest. Evelyn gasped, her eyes darting between her wildly fluctuating instruments and the besieged windows. My father's notes. He mentioned a nexus point in the old administration wing, where the initial dimensional fissure occurred. Where, if we can disrupt the energy flow there, we might, just might, sever the main conduit. It was a desperate half-baked plan, born Scylla terror and fragmented research, but it was all we had. And how do we get to Hillcrest through that? Brody gestured with his shotgun towards the opaque, roiling fog outside, now filled with indistinct, lumbering shapes that moved with a horrifying, purposeful slowness. The Whistler, I said, the chilling realization dawning. Its tune. Ellie said the patients were looking for the doctors. Winters was the primary. The Whistler, it's not just wandering. It's a hunter, or maybe a shepherd guiding the others. My old forgotten case file detail clicked into place. The missing nurse had last been seen arguing with Winters, and a patient known for his incessant, tuneless whistling had been nearby. "If we can neutralize or distract the Whistler," Evelyn said, her mind racing, "it might create enough chaos among the others to give us a window." She pointed to a complex diagram in her father's journal. He was working on a sonic dampener, something to counteract the specific frequencies he believed opened the rift. "I've tried to replicate it, but it's unstable." She indicated a portable, jury-rigged device on her workbench, wires trailing, emitting a low, almost inaudible thrum. It was a suicide mission, but the alternative was to be consumed here. Brody, his face set, nodded. "I'll draw its fire. You two, get that thing to Hillcrest." He checked his shotgun shells, his hands surprisingly steady. The plan, if it could be called that, was terrifyingly simple. Brody would create a diversion, try to lure the Whistler away from the weather station. Gio, Evelyn and I, under the cover of that chaos and armed with her unstable sonic device, would make a desperate run for Hillcrest through the fog-choked, phantom-infested town. As Brody threw open the door and fired a volley into the pressing fog, roaring a challenge, the Whistler's tapping instantly ceased. A truly unearthly shriek tore through the night, followed by Brody's bellow of pain and the clatter of his shotgun. The fog outside the doorway swirled violently, and then a moment of relative quiet. "Now," Evelyn urged, grabbing the sonic device. We plunged into the nightmare. The fog was alive, its tendrils cold and grasping, whispering forgotten names and fragments of mad ramblings. Shapes lunged from the gray, their faces blurred in the mist, their touch like ice. We stumbled, ran, guided more by memory of Millbrook's layout than by sight. Several times the mournful chorus of the phantom phones seemed to erupt right beside us, spectral voices calling our names, trying to lure us off course. Evelyn clutched the sonic device, its low thrum occasionally spiking, causing the nearby fog shapes to momentarily recoil, their outlines wavering. Hillcrest Asylum was worse than any memory. The air itself throbbed with a malevolent energy. The administration wing, where Evelyn believed the nexus point lay, was a gaping wound, half collapsed, spectral figures drifting through its ruined corridors like dispossessed royalty. As we reached what Winters had designated his observation chamber, a circular room with a floor covered in faded complex sigils, the Whistler appeared, not as a silhouette, but horribly partially materialized, taller than a man, clad in what looked like decayed asylum fatigues, its face a nightmarish ruin of elongated features and hollow burning eyes. It had Brody's torn sheriff's jacket, snagged on one skeletal arm. Its whistling was no longer tuneless, but a coherent, mind-shattering dirge. It lunged. Evelyn screamed, activating the sonic dampener at full power. A high-pitched, dissonant whine filled the room, so intense it felt like my skull would crack. The Whistler shrieked, its form flickering, its physical manifestation seeming to unravel. The spectral figures in the corridors wailed and scattered. The very stones of Hillcrest seemed to groan in protest. Evelyn, her face a mask of desperate concentration, directed the sonic beam towards the center of the sigil-covered floor. The air shimmered. A visible tear like heat haze over asphalt appeared above the sigils, a wound in the world. "Frank," she yelled over the din. "Your connection. That old case. You have to provide an anchor, something rooted in this world, to sever the ethereal." I didn't understand, not fully, but I knew I had to try. I focused on the image of the missing nurse, on Winter's cold eyes, on the crushing weight of the unsolved. I poured all my regret, my 30 years of carried guilt, into that moment, projecting it towards the shimmering tear. The tear pulsed violently. The Whistler gave one final ear-splitting shriek and dissolved into oily smoke. Evelyn collapsed, the sonic dampener falling from her grasp, its whine dying, and slowly, agonizingly, the shimmering tear began to shrink, to knit itself closed, the collective moan of the sigh fading with it. The oppressive weight in the air lessened. The fog outside the shattered windows of Hillcrest began, almost imperceptibly, to thin. The sun rose on a Millbrook scoured clean, not by water, but by an ordeal that had stripped away its placid facade. The fog, the unnatural sentient beast that had held the town hostage, was gone, leaving behind a world unnervingly bright, sharp-edged, and quiet. Too quiet. We found Brody Maxwell near the weather station, alive, miraculously, but badly injured, his arm broken, his face a roadmap of new terrors. He'd fought the Whistler, wounded it with buckshot laced with rock salt, an old wives' tale he desperately gambled on, and it had been enough to make it retreat, however briefly. Evelyn Hayes was changed. The ordeal at Hillcrest had taken its toll. She survived, but the fierce light in her eyes was dimmed, replaced by a deep, weary understanding. The sonic dampener, or perhaps her proximity to the closing rift, had left her sensitive. She claimed she could still feel the thin places in the world, could still hear the faintest echoes still a collective sigh, a constant low hum beneath the noise of everyday life. She dedicated herself to monitoring Hillcrest from afar, a solitary, self-appointed guardian. Millbrook itself became a town of hushed conversations and averted gazes. Some families packed up and left within the week, unable to bear the weight of what they had almost seen, almost heard. Others, the old-timers mostly, stayed, their silence a testament to resilience, or perhaps a grim acceptance of the darkness that lay just beneath the surface of their small New England lives. The stories of the long fog would become another layer in Millbrook's haunted folklore, whispered by future generations. I chose to stay. Retirement in Millbrook was no longer about peace. It was about vigil. I faced the ghosts of my past, looked into the abyss that Winters had so arrogantly breached, and somehow survived. The guilt over the old nurse's case hadn't vanished, but it had shifted. I hadn't solved it, not in the way a cop solves a case, but I had perhaps helped close a door that should never have been opened. Months later, on a crisp, clear autumn night, the kind silver night Millbrook had probably forgotten it could have, I was walking Old Mill Road, the road that led past Hillcrest. I hadn't taken it since that first fateful drive. Tonight I did. The asylum was a dark, silent ruin against the star-dusted sky. No flickering lights, no drifting shadows. It felt dormant, not empty. Never truly empty, but quiescent. Then, as I passed the crumbling Maine gates, I heard it, faint, almost carried away on the breeze, but unmistakable. A single tinny burring from the direction of the town. Just once. Then silence. A beat passed. Then, from the wooded hillside just beyond the asylum grounds, another sound drifted down. A soft, almost melancholic whistling. Not the discordant, hunting tune Scylla whistler, but a different melody, simpler, sadder. It wasn't a threat. It felt like an echo, a reminder, a quiet acknowledgement that some doors, even when closed, are never truly, fully sealed, and that some silences are merely the pause between one whisper and the next. My watch in Millbrook, I realized, was far from over. It had only just found its true beginning. Hillcrest Asylum. It looms over Millbrook like a memory that refuses to fade. Frank Simmons learned that some doors, once opened, are never truly closed. The rules were a desperate attempt to contain the horror, but the collective sigh remembers. The fog may have cleared, but the echoes remain. Seriously, if you didn't stay until the very end, you missed the ultimate revelation, the twist that reveals the true, ongoing cost of Millbrook's secrets. The last few moments change everything. What do you think the collective sigh is? What was Dr. Winters truly trying to achieve? Share your theories in the comments below, and if you made it through the long fog, If Hillcrest hasn't claimed you, then you're already a part of our story. Subscribe to Night Creepypasta Rules, because some towns, they never truly let you leave. And the watch is eternal.